Welcome back to another episode of Tales from the Trenches. Natalie and I are here again to talk about stories and things that we've learned from the peer groups and have talked about in the peer groups. And today's gonna be a little bit of different format than we've done before because we talk frequently about all kinds of different processes and whatnot. And the reality is that you want a process for basically all of the key things you do in your business, of which there's probably 150, right? But we really decided that we wanted to come up with what we kind of each thought were our top 5 processes that you kind of have to have in your business. And there's a little bit of overlap, but there's not entirely overlap. So we're going to kind of go back and forth and kind of share our processes back and forth. And Natalie, I think you'll agree that at every size, you want to have a version of a process, because if you don't have something written down, it's hard to make it better. And I know you and I talk about that frequently. Do you have any recent examples of where, like, you're talking through someone through a version 1.0 process and said, hey, okay, now eventually we're going to come back to this, but let's just get 1.0 done first?
Yeah, we had that example was sales process. And in one of the groups, they were like, I really want to offload the sales process. And I said, great, is any of it written down? And he's like, well, no. And I'm like, so what's the plan? Like, if you can't offload it without some form of documentation, some form of how do you teach that to someone else if nothing is on paper? And that person really sat there back and was like, well, yep, I understand what you're saying now. So it's not about just having the process. It has to be written out.
Yeah, and it's pretty tough to upgrade a process without having anything written down, and you certainly can't leverage automation and AI and other tools to make those processes better, without having it documented in some way, shape, or form. So that's why we're kind of covering these things today. And so what I think the plan for our conversation is to kind of work our way down our list. So Natalie, out of your top 5 processes, which process is number 5? Now, with the caveat being that anybody could say that the 5th most important process could be the most important one. We're not going to quibble about that. But Natalie, what was process number 5 on your list?
So for me, process number 5 was client onboarding.
Okay.
And the reason I'm passionate about client onboarding because it sets the tone for that relationship from day one.
Yep.
And if you don't have a good client onboarding process, that makes your client offboarding process, quite honestly, crappy.
Right.
And because there's no way for you to reverse it, things get missed, the client doesn't get communicated to, and it is much easier to retain clients than it is to find new ones.
True story.
So you want to have that initial client onboarding just written down so that it goes through, and then you can decide this piece isn't working, this piece isn't working. But for me, your client onboarding at any stage, it doesn't matter if you're a one-man shop or 100 people, your client onboarding needs to be written down so that you can improve it and track it.
I 100% agree. And the thing is, we've talked about this before. I've created a couple of videos about it. I'll actually link up above to a playlist that kind of walks through a number of different onboarding related things, because there's some content out there that's worth watching for sure. So my number 5 process was account management, and similar to your onboarding process, right? Account management really helps set the tone with your clients and make sure that the client is focusing on the right things, right? And I've heard a lot recently from other MSPs that they're saying that they're losing some clients, and not all, but in a few cases where I've talked to them about, like, what's your account management processes like? Have you done a recent strategic business review, or whatever you want to call that version of a check-in meeting? When was the last time you did it? And they said, well, gosh, I guess it's been 7 or 8, 9 months. And I said, well, that might be why, right? Maybe they don't understand exactly all the good things you're doing, or maybe you're focusing too much on tickets and those kinds of things, right? And much like the onboarding process, your account management process is fairly iterative as well. You usually kind of like throw a bunch of stuff out there, and you eventually kind of whittle it down to trying to match the content to the audience, right? Where you want to have as much strategic stuff to talk with, like, the owner and whatever, where maybe you talk about tickets and kind of minutia with maybe the IT liaison, the person who's kind of in charge of the IT, but maybe not the owner of the company, trying to align those things together. And it's something that you modify over time, because usually account management's held by owners and then eventually gets handed off to somebody else to run account management. So there's that process will kind of change over time. Natalie, what are your thoughts there? What do you think about account management?
It's one of my other things that I'm passionate about. I actually was in a conversation with another MSP employee, which they got a client. That client was leaving their previous MSP of 15 years.
Wow.
Which and in the email, it basically was like, we're not leaving you for anything other than we've outgrown you. And the previous MSP was like, oh, but you haven't. But at that point, it's too
Right.
late. You have not shown your value. And that 15 years, changing an MSP after 15 years, something, they truly felt that they had outgrown the client. I mean, the client had outgrown the MSP. So if you're not showing value, that's going to happen.
Yep. 100%.
And they were leaving for more money. They were going to pay more.
Yeah, if they didn't feel like they're getting the value from the one
Yeah.
MSP and they're willing to pay a little bit more for it, yeah, that's an important thing to call out too. Is that it's not always about the dollars. Obviously, it is a fair amount of the time, but there will certainly be those outliers where that's a thing that they could have even potentially even charge them more for doing more of that kind of
Yeah.
work too, right? Yeah, spending the time on the high value, high impact things where it's not so much fix a ticket issue, but this is like help them set the strategic direction of the
Yeah.
business, and having those higher conversations is what can keep a client around a little bit longer. So that's a great call out. And again, I have a couple of videos about that as well, so I'll link up above for that too. So Natalie, what was your number 4 process? Like what's the fourth one on your list?
My fourth is an SOP for your SOPs. It is, in my opinion, much easier to set the standard of how all your SOPs are written when you only have 5 SOPs, or you only have, 10 clients, or, when it's smaller. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be the end all be all process forever, but I have seen it too many times, and from personal experience, implementing IT Glue 3 times in the same MSP because we didn't know what we didn't know. Um, it Part of your documentation is I treat it like an extra tech. It's a tool. It's where all the knowledge is. And if it is jumbled, it's just like asking somebody to recall it from their brain and you're going through this mental Rolodex. You have to have a standard. Otherwise, people will stop using it. I see it way too often. Oh yeah, I have a documentation tool, but our guys don't actually go in there and look because it's muddled. And I'm like, that's the problem. Make sure because they should be, and you
Right.
have to have documents. And if you have a set standard, it's going to make it easier and more efficient. Plus, you can so many PSAs linked to the knowledge base, linked to this, and it's just sets you up for automation later.
I couldn't agree more. And documentation is one of those ones where we overlap. Documentation for me was number 3 on my list. So, and for me, that SOP for SOPs is great because you want to have, to your point, you want to have that figured out before you have 300 documents, because going back and redoing all of them or updating them all is a big ask, and it gets harder, right? And that's why all these processes are important, right? Figuring out a process when you're representatively smaller than you are a few years from now makes your life a whole lot easier because you at least have something documented. The other thing for me with documentation is you can only have one spot for stuff, right? If the minute you have 2 spots is the minute you give your text an excuse to go, well, I don't know where it was, so I just kind of did what I did, which is not at all what you want your text doing. And when we think about things like gross margin and some of those other pieces, having those having good documentation and good tools around those kinds of things really helps develop, drive your gross margin, right? Because as you said, it's like having an extra tech, because you get the data out of someone's head, and you allow your other techs, your more junior techs or other brand new techs, to not have to like learn things the hard way. So
Yeah.
I love that. I love documentation as the number 4 process.
So what was your number? Your we overlapped for 3 and 4, but what was your 4?
Yeah, so my number 4 is all about ticket intake and your triage dispatch process. Well, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, and the reality is that your triage and dispatch process to me is more important than your overall ticket process. Now, it's not that to say your ticket process is unimportant, but that setting that ticket up for success, it helps everybody out. It helps your team out, helps your techs out, helps the client out, helps the relationship out, right? The more you can do that process well, the more the more leeway you have on the back end. I know this was on your list as well. So now tell me about triage and dispatch for you.
So for me, it was my number three. So we kind of had those flipped.
Yep.
But to me, your triage and ticket flow process is kind of the heart of your support operations. It needs to be kind of vetted at any maturity level, and the process is going to change. It's not going to be the same at, stage one, growth stage one, as it is at growth stage four, but it should mature as your company matures.
Right.
The problem is that in a stage one operation maturity level, I just see it too many times where it's a free for all. Things aren't getting hit when they are supposed to. There's no priority setting. There's nothing. And at that stage, as we talked about client onboarding and account management, it's all about client retention because they are hard to find.
Right.
And you have to have, one of the top reasons a client will leave an MSP is support. The support is not what they expected. It's a misalignment of clear expectations. And this process, if you know you have this process, I don't care if we're working out of an email because we don't have a PSA yet. I don't care if you have a dispatcher at this point. Whatever stage, that triage and ticket flow is extremely important.
Agreed. Not only is it important, we also have, you and I have a podcast about it. I have another video about it. I'll link those up as well. So now tell me about and it's kind of funny because when we kind of shared a list like a minute before starting the recording of this, your number one and number two are vastly different than my number one and number two. So tell me a little bit about your number two process.
Yeah, so for me, it was incident response plan.
Sure.
And for me, I can't stress enough the security aspect of an MSP, as you are the aggregate of all the risks that you're taking on. And as I've gone through all of these peer groups and prior peer groups, and hey, these processes are to keep you out of court, and these processes are to keep you like, hey, this is exactly how we do this every time, and the legal ramifications. And to me, incident response plan is a must.
Okay.
It's just part of your backbone of your MSP. I've seen one that's 1 page. I've seen one 14 pages in a workflow that you get lost in.
Sure.
But the key really is, it is not when. I mean, it's not if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen. And you need to be prepared to be able to say, this is how we handle it, and we're going to handle it this way. Even if you're the one man, you still need a process for it. And I think that's one of the reasons it's my number two. Because once again, it is not if it's going to happen. Someone in your client base or you will have some sort of security incident.
Yep.
And it only gets more likely with more clients. And so being able to vet that out early keeps you kind of sane. You do not want to be the one that's running around with a chicken, like a chicken with your head cut off, when you're trying to make your client stable.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea behind having some amount of thought behind how you're going to respond when things go sideways is really important, especially because these incidents don't usually happen like, at 10 a.m. on a Saturday when no one, when you have nothing going on that day. It's usually, 5 p.m. on a Friday of a holiday weekend, or, over the middle of the night when people are trying to sleep or whatever. And so because they always seem to happen like when you are probably not at your best, whether it's sleep wise, or you're ready to be done with the week wise, or whatever. And sometimes these things are carefully timed for that in particular, especially if it's some sort of a ransomware or cyber security attack. Having a written down process to follow, at least to kind of get you started, is a really important thing. So while it's not in my top five, I 100% agree that it's a very important process to have. So my number two process was an entirely different side of the world. It's really all about lead generation, right? We talk to MSPs all the time, and like 90% of the time, people are like, "Hey, how do you get more leads?" I'm looking for more leads, and it's because people, and usually the question is like this: is how do I get more sales? And it's not, they're not really looking for. I mean, yes, they're looking for ultimately new clients, but the issue isn't that they don't have a sales process. I mean, that's also probably the issue, but the issue is more that they don't know and don't have a cohesive plan to generate enough leads, right? Because most MSP business owners, once they get to know somebody, can close the deal at some level, especially if it's some sort of a referral or whatever. But the issue is that they don't get enough leads in the pipeline to be able to close enough of them to grow the business the way they want it to grow. So, I think that having the lead generation process written down is really important because it gives you a place to start. And you also give the opportunity to say, okay, I'm getting all of my leads from over here, but not these other things I'm doing over in the other spots. So maybe I should do that differently, or maybe I should make a change to that, or maybe I should emphasize the one that's working more and de-emphasize the stuff that's not working as well, right? It's really more about tracking where things are coming from, having a cohesive way of looking at things, so that way you can understand where things are coming. Natalie, I know you have this conversation with MSPs as much as I do. What have you been talking about in when it comes to lead generation in your space?
So we've really been talking about intent or with intentional time management about it. And I talked to, however many peer group members and people in the channel. And it doesn't matter what stage of maturity you are or what growth stage you are.
Hmm.
Um, Time is your commodity. And we constantly have conversations. There's always a fire. It's MSP life. We know that. There's
Yep.
always going to be something that comes up. But not having the sales process or at least lead generation, where do you get them with intent written down and really tracking it? You're kind of just going, what my favorite word is, feel skis. You're going off of feel skis. I
Yep.
feel like I'm getting enough. I feel like this. I feel like that. And although it wasn't in my top five, because in my head I went a different direction because I'm like, oh, this is like the must. It is equally just as important as any in the top five of any of ours, right?
Right.
It's you have to know where the leads are coming in because I've seen it too many times. They're like, oh, my funnel dried up. And I'm like, okay, well, how many hours did you spend on lead generation? And they're like, oh, well, I got busy and I haven't been focusing on that. I'm like, well, that would be why the funnel is not there because it requires it. It's like a trying to grow, and I'm not a plant person, so I kill almost all of them. But it's like trying to keep the plant alive and you overwater it one week and then the next week you're like, oh, you let it dry out and then it's cranky with you and it goes back and forth and you're just trying to keep it alive. That's what lead generation is for me.
Yep.
You have to have this constant, you have to water it every week and you have to put intent on it every week and you have to make sure it has fertilization and you have like just like a plant, you have to do that with intent.
Yep. Yeah, so two things. Thing one, my plants I keep alive are the Lego variety, which works well for me. But I'll never forget that when I started my first, I guess it was an MSP, but it was kind of back in the break fix only days. I was real busy out the gate. Like I was working 40, 50 hours a week and billing 40 or 50 hours a week, which is great because I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to be rich now. And then I worked 40 or 50 hours a week for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And then I got done and I went, oh crap, I don't have anything sold. I don't have anything to do right now. I'm making $0 a minute for the foreseeable future until I get the sales engine back and running again. Right. So make sure that you make time for this every week and you have a plan to execute. Because the last thing you want to do too is scattershot things kind of here, there, and everywhere. You really want to make sure that you're deliberate about that time, which is I think another kind of underlying conversation around all of these processes is you want to be deliberate about
Uh-huh.
the time and energy you put into your business, and having a process for some of these core things is really really important.
Yeah.
So Natalie, bring us home on your list. What is your number one process?
Man, I will tell you this probably comes from more from a trauma standpoint.
Is this your PTSD speaking?
Yeah. For me, it's disaster recovery process. Without backups, without knowing exactly what you're doing, like backups are key. I used to tell my techs all the time, I don't care what you do, we can reverse it as long as there's a backup, and clarity on the client side of what you're backing up and how often. So it's
Sure.
not your disaster recovery process is not just yes, I'm doing backups. It's how are you doing backups? When are you doing backups? How does somebody call in if they think they need to have a recovery done? And this is internal and external. Because without backups, you are dead in the water.
Hmm.
If something crashes and burns and you don't have a backup of it, you are basically square one having to rebuild or get some company to do file data recovery off of a hard drive, which can cost $5,000 to $20,000 if you have to really get into it, which I have done.
Right.
Um, so it's really, for me, backups. How are you doing your backups? What is your disaster recovery process? Because anything, you can fix anything with a backup.
Yeah, absolutely, and this is kind of related to your number two as well, right? It's just have knowing how to recover from a bad thing that happens in the business, right? And having that thought through ahead of time and having a plan around it and understanding, to your point, what's backed up, how often is it backed up, where's the risk, all of those other things. Because if you can't demonstrate what the risks are to your client, it's pretty tough for you to get them to like do the things you think they should do too, right? It kind of leads back to some of the other things, the account management, and some of the documentation and some of those other pieces, like onboarding, like all of that stuff kind of ties together, right? Which is kind of why we're having this conversation, is that it's all of these things sort of like integrate with each other at least a little bit. So that's a great call out. Yeah, and without good backups, it can be pretty tough, right? And you know the old saying was always what the is that you know the one thing that can sink your MSP is backup failures, or not doing backups properly. I think the second piece is not doing security. So your number one and number two are absolutely speak to some of those adages of the MSP space. And again, I completely agree. If I maybe did a list of 10, I think that DR and backup and incident responses would be in that list for sure.
Yeah, making a
So
list of five was hard because I had like six other ones I could be like, oh, but without this, you're this. But I've been in a position where a tech has taken down a server and there wasn't a backup, and we have to, luckily we purposely didn't have any major information on that server, but it was still very clear that you have to have some sort of process. And every time you do a one-off for a client, like, oh, this one wants it every 4 hours, this one wants it 8 hours, this one wants it every hour, every time you do a one-off, something's going to get missed.
mhm.
It does. It doesn't matter. It kept me up at night. It kept my owner up at night, backups. And it just did. I would like look, that was the first thing I checked every morning, was backups. I've talked to multiple MSPs, but I've had a few in the last 6 months that have been like, yeah, we didn't have a good backup and it failed, and I'm still rebuilding this thing.
And maybe rebuilding your client relationship too. So
Yeah, it's not a good position to be in.
absolutely not.
So what is your number one? Because after you said your number one earlier, I'm like, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, so my number one, and is this is the one that I struggled with the most when I was trying to do my own thing, is the invoicing and accounts receivable process, right? You must get paid, and you must get paid on a regular basis. You must have a really strong invoicing process and automate as much of it as you possibly can, outsource it when you can. This isn't the thing that you need to do yourself for forever. And in fact, this is one of the very first things I would outsource, because this is a thing I am
Mhm.
not strong in, is getting invoices out timely. And then having a strong accounts receivable process to make sure that when a client doesn't pay you, you know what you're doing, right? And you have all that stuff figured out, and ideally before you need it. Now, of course, that's not how you typically works. And the funny thing is that this isn't just a brand new small MSP kind of a thing, because I've talked to plenty of MSPs that are well in the seven digits in revenue, that have AR issues, right? They said, yeah, I've got 30 or 40 or $50,000 of AR sitting out there that's aging, past 90 days or whatever. And I'm like, what, time out? How are you making payroll, man? Like, and usually it's been like, well, yeah, we had to, do some other things, or we've managed everything else pretty well. But I'm like, yeah, go get that money. That money is yours. It's someone else is just holding on to it. So, it's for me, it's You gotta get paid. And, because if you don't get paid, even if you are a bigger MSP and you're not getting paid and you have a cash flow issue, you could have a
Yep.
real big problem. Businesses can go bankrupt, even if you're profitable, if you don't have cash flow. And AR is a really important piece.
I tell peer group members and not even non-peer group members, even non-MSP businesses all the time. Like, you are not the bank.
Right.
You cannot be a bank. You don't want to be in banking. It comes with a whole nother set of rules. You have to have this figured out because I've seen it too many times. And like I said, MSP or not MSP, I deal with companies that aren't MSP sometimes too. And cash flow is crucial. And so if you're not getting paid, chances are you can't make bills. And then you're my one of my favorite things, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Mhm.
And eventually Peter runs out of money.
Right.
Can't pay Paul, and then you're stuck. And I see it and it does not go away at 1 million. It doesn't go away at 7 million. It doesn't go away at 10 million. You still have to have cash flow and get paid. And in my head, when I'm writing these, I'm like, oh, well, it's a given for me, right? Because I'm
Right.
a numbers person. But I see it too often that it's not a given for others, that's not the happy place for them.
Yeah, it's definitely not my happy place, but it's a even less happy place is when you have to close the doors because you didn't get
Yep.
paid, right? So that one for me is it hits close to home. Also, it's just vital, right? So, I really like this kind of format, kind of going back and forth and sharing processes. Obviously, we're not going to do that every single time because that would get real boring in a hurry. But these are some real important things to think about, and wherever possible, I'll throw some links up above. I'll drop some links in the description of this podcast to some YouTube videos and stuff that I or we have done other things on already. This stuff is really important and kind of what we spend a lot of our day job talking in the peer groups about. And so while I'm talking about peer groups, I do want to throw a quick plug in for the peer groups over at Paxate because that's kind of where we both hang our shingle at the moment. If you are looking for owners or service managers or COOs or sales folks or security or account managers, dispatchers, project managers, I think I got them all. But if you're looking for a group with any of those audiences, please check us out. We'll again I'll drop a link in the description to the podcast, and we'd love to have you. And we this is what we get to do on a daily basis, and we love it. So, thank you for spending your time with us today on our podcast.
Oh, also, just I know it's the end, but we also have a lot of ILTs
Oh,
over at
good call.
Tax8 that are just specifically for these types of things.
Yeah, those instructor-led training courses are
Yep.
fantastic, right? And you and I have created a bunch ourselves, and we have plenty more really smart people running a bunch of other ones as well. So
Yeah.
great call out, Natalie. So Natalie, thanks for a quick
Okay.
Monday afternoon record.
All right. Well, thank you for jumping on with me as well.